Cool. Thanks, Sig. Thanks for everyone for coming to MongoDB World and for coming to my session. So today I'm showing off something brand new and shiny and hopefully exciting, which is MongoDB Charts. So the agenda today is fairly straightforward. I'm going to just set the scene just a little bit on why is MongoDB doing this. It's not a database, it's a different kind of thing. And just trying to talk about what it is, how is it different from other things that might exist out there. But the crux of this session will be basically a bunch of demos. So hopefully some of you saw Grigori demoing in the keynote or maybe in his session this morning. But I'm going to give you basically a tour of all the things you could be able to do with the Charts beta, which was released today. In the end, I'll talk just a little bit about how to get it, how to install it, how to provide feedback, and also a little bit about the roadmap about what we'll be doing after this initial release. So let's get going. Boring legal statement, don't bother reading it. Actually, no, must read it. But basically, most of what I'm talking about is about stuff that's live and you can get in your hands today. I will be talking a little bit about our future plans. They are plans, not promises. We will change, particularly if you tell us we need to change. But I would do like to be open and kind of tell you some of the things that we're thinking about. So that's what that's all about. Okay, so let's sort of set the scene just a little bit. So I won't go into why visualization is important in this session. Grigori did discuss that a little bit this morning, but suffice to say, data that you see in a JSON document or in a table or whatever, yeah, it's all there. You can't really make much sense of it. Visualizations are where you can actually start to understand and communicate and learn from your data. So that's why we want to visualize. So things that people typically do today, if you're a developer, then you write some code. I'm a developer, I love writing code. And sometimes that's a great solution, but not always the best solution. What if you're not a developer? That option's not really available to you. And even if you are a developer, it might be code that is really not worth writing. You shouldn't need to write code just to get a bar chart from your MongoDB data. So there's also a bunch of third-party stacks that include visualization as well as maybe other data storage or warehousing technologies. And a lot of the tools that are out there in the market don't really understand MongoDB, so sometimes you might lift your data out of MongoDB using what's called ETL or extract, transform, load, put that in a different repository and then run the tool on top of that. So that also works, and if you've got all this ETL infrastructure in a data warehouse, maybe that's a great solution for you. But it's a lot of stuff to set up, a lot of feeding and watering you have to do, and it's not exactly a quick way of getting insight out of your MongoDB data. We also have another tool within, I guess, the MongoDB product family called the BI connector, which you might have seen. And that's kind of a way of trying to bridge these worlds. So you can use a tool such as Tableau or Power BI on top of MongoDB by basically putting this thing in the middle. And that's also a fine solution, particularly if you already have an investment in some of those tools. But it is more stuff to set up. You flatten your schema and you possibly lose some of the richness and some of the really nice things about MongoDB, the fact that we can have these beautiful documents and we're not constrained by the tabular data model. So while all those options exist and all of them are valid and continue to be valid, there are a lot of the times when none of those options are particularly great. So people are asking us, and we're asking ourselves, wouldn't it be nice if you could visualize your MongoDB data without having to write code, without needing to do lifting and shifting and ETL into some other data repository, without needing to buy a whole bunch of tools and cobble together integration between a whole bunch of different products, and probably most importantly, without losing what makes MongoDB really great, which is the fact that it is a document database, and we can have this great richness and sort of polymorphism and schema-free or way of storing data. And really excited to say now you can, because we have this new thing called MongoDB Charts. So this is kind of just how we summarize, I guess, what it is and why it's interesting. So it's the fastest way to build visualizations over your MongoDB data. It's not the most powerful. There's features that will exist in other things that might not be there, but this is quick and easy ways of getting visualization. It understands and is built for the MongoDB document model. It's not an afterthought. We're not having to munge things and make them tabular. It's only designed for MongoDB, and it natively understands these lovely data structures. And because we can point directly to MongoDB, we're not having to point it at like a separate data warehouse or something like that. You can visualize current data time to value and understanding what's going on is really low. And you can point it to either an on-prem database or to Atlas or to both quite happily. So that's kind of how we're positioning this. So before I get into the demos, there's really only a few kind of concepts that you need to understand to start running with charts. So the first thing we have is a concept of a data source. So a data source is basically how you tell charts to get data from a particular MongoDB collection. So it's basically just a reference to a collection, or it could indeed be a view. So if you want to do some pre-aggregation and save that as a view, you can do that as well. But a data source basically tells charts, hey, here's a connection to a particular collection or a particular database, and that's there to get data for to build a chart. A chart is a chart, so it's a graph, it's a line chart, it's a bar chart, scatter diagram, whatever. But within charts, the key thing to understand is it gets its data from a single data source, which means that each chart gets its data from a single collection, unless the data source happens to be a view with a dollar lookup, which is a way you can do that. But generally speaking, just think about it, each chart is mapped to a single data source, which maps to a single collection. However, we have this other concept called a dashboard, and a dashboard is basically lots of charts that are grouped together, managed together. You can customize the layout, you can share it, and different charts on the same dashboard can come from different data sources and therefore different collections. So if you want to go and tell a story that shows a bunch of different charts from kind of related collections, but different collections, that's where dashboards come super interesting. So what I'll do now is kind of show you the 0 to 60 drag race with charts, just how you use it to create your first data source, dashboard, and chart. Then I'll circle back and actually show you a lot more detail about all the things we can do. But I'll just sort of start by showing the basic workflow. So I'll talk about installation a bit later on, but Charts is installed as a server and accessed through a web browser. So multiple people can talk to Charts through your one instance. So when you first install Charts, this is what it looks like. It's a little bit sad and lonely because there's not much in here, but that will change pretty quickly. So you can see here across the top, we have dashboards and data sources. I'll talk about users later on. But when we say we're on a new data source, this is where we give it the connection string of the MongoDB server that we want to pull our data from. So I could go and get my Atlas URI. Because I'm scared of conference Wi-Fi, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to my local one, but I promise you it does work. So here this is just a local instance of MongoDB I'm running on this particular laptop. What it's doing now is it's discovering all of the databases and all of the collections, and I can add one or multiple of these. So if I want to go and get several things, I could click those if I wanted. Today, I'm just interested in this particular collection called supply sales. So I will choose that one. Next thing I can do is set permissions. So I'll talk about that later on, but let's just say that this is not sensitive data, so I'm going to make this data source available to all the users on my charts instance. So that's great. I've now got a data source. Let's do something with it. So this is where a dashboard comes in. So I haven't got any of those yet. So let me go and create a dashboard, which I'll call that. And now I can start adding some charts. So we click Add Chart. This is the chart builder. This is really where the magic happens. And it's sort of a drag and drop experience, similar, not the same as what you might have seen in some other products. So firstly, I'll choose the supply sales, which is the one that we just added. And let's just create a really simple visualization. So let's drag the, so this is the fields from my schema. I'm going to drag the store location over there. I'm going to drag ID, and you can see here it's figured out that I need to do a count. I've already got a chart. Let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's go and put the purchase method into that particular channel. And let's maybe make it a stacked instead of a grouped one. And I'll give it a title. So purchases by store. And then let's save the chart. Okay, this chart is now on our dashboard. The dimensions it chose weren't kind of ideal, so I'll make it a little bit bigger. And that's really all there is to using charts. We create data sources, we create dashboards, we create charts, we lay them out on dashboards, and later on we can share those, which I'll discuss in a little bit. But before we do that, let's just talk a little bit more about some of the things we can do with charts. So, look, it's a charting tool, so it does charting stuff. So the next bunch of things I'm going to show are probably the kinds of things that you'd expect. But we think we've got the most common capabilities you need to really get insight and create the charts that will make sense of your data. So I'll show you some of the different types of charts that we can build. I'll talk a bit about how aggregations can be applied, because charts are really about rolling up your data, and we can use the full power of MongoDB aggregations to do that. We can filter the data to see a subset. We have something called sample mode, which I'll explain. We've also got binning and sorting, which are really powerful ways of visualizing your data in some different ways. So let's go and look at some of those things. So let's maybe create a new chart. So I'll get our supply sales we did before. So let's just create more or less the same thing we had previously. So super quick to do, purchase method. So that was the first chart. You see how it changed to a stacked. We've also got column charts, which is just the same thing sideways. We've got line charts, which are not great for this data source, but make sense sometimes. We've got area charts. We've also got even heat maps. This actually looks really different, but it's actually just another way of visualizing the same data, where the darker color indicates sort of the higher value. And we've got donut charts. So, and you'll notice that as I chose the different chart types, it retained my field mapping. So as long as when I changed charts, the fields that were made sense still make sense with the new chart type, we'll do that and you won't lose data. Because the donut chart doesn't have that extra field, which is series, that's now disappeared. So if I switch it back to bar chart, that's gone, but I could then go and drag something else on that if I felt like it. So a whole range of different chart types that we can use there. Next thing I want to talk about is aggregation. So the way charts works is it actually just generates an aggregation pipeline that runs on the MongoDB server using the full power of MongoDB, and it just returns like the smallest number of documents required to render that. So basically there's probably one document for each of those bars. So it's returning to 6 documents and it's doing all the aggregation on the server. Some of these channels you can see are called aggregation channels. And that means that you have to tell it what kind of aggregation function that you want. So because ID is a string or an object ID, the only thing I can do is I can do a count on top of that. But there's other things I can do. So if I want to have a look at the customer ages, so because this is a number, I've got a whole bunch more options. And currently it guessed that I might want to sum together all my customers' ages. And for some things that might make sense. For ages, it's a bit silly. So instead, let's go and choose mean. Let's maybe make it a column chart, which might be slightly easier to tell. And that's now a sensible chart. Most of the customers are pretty similar ages, but it is a thing that we can find out. We can also do something like see what the average satisfaction might look like. Sorry, I put that in the wrong place. Let me just do that again. So store location to category and satisfaction in here. So again, satisfaction, it makes more sense to show the median and the mean. And now actually seeing that there is a bit of a dip here. And I could even go and sort the values from like lowest to highest satisfaction, and I can tell clearly there is something going on with satisfaction. I could also show the standard deviation as one of the other things. So standard deviation shows the spread of values. And that same store, San Diego, has it's got a lower average and a higher standard deviation. So that means there are some people who are really unhappy and some people who are quite happy. So if you're analyzing this data, you probably want to figure out like what's going on in that store. What can I find out about that? So let's try using maybe this category channel to find out a bit more. Let's maybe put the gender and put that onto here. Let's also put this back into mean. So now we can see the average satisfaction across stores and by genders. And remember we saw our high standard deviation. It seems that the male customers in this particular store are quite happy, but for some reason the female customers are not happy. And we can also look at something else, like maybe let's see whether the purchase method has any impact on this. And here there's also some correlation here in that the online and phone are fine, but it's the in-store ones. So there's obviously something very strange happening in that store, which is maybe as a senior executive in this company we might want to have a look at. So I saw there was a correlation between both purchase method and gender. I can't show both in that one channel. But another thing we can do is we can filter the data set. So suppose I still want to show this chart, but I want to only see what's going on for female customers. So here I can actually enter any MQL query into this bar. And you can see here I've got this autocomplete. So if I choose customer gender is equal to female, and I apply that, So I can see that there's a really big drop in that particular case. And I'm pretty well finished with my chart. I'm going to use this and actually heads will roll. So I'll say customer satisfaction, if I can type. So what happens when 200 people watch you type, you completely fail to be able to do it. But we can do that, and that will fix whatever I did wrong. So that's good. So before I save the chart, I did want to show one other thing. So there's this thing called sample mode. What will normally happen is MongoDB Charts will consider all the documents that match the filter, and it will build the charts on that. And that's usually what you want. And this is not a huge collection, so this is really sensible. Suppose I had like 10 million records in this. That might make the chart a little bit slow to render or create a bit of drain on the database. So what I can do if I feel like, I can switch the sample mode on and off. And you can see the length of the bars do change a little bit here because I'm getting a different random sample of documents. But the basic pattern is still the same. So in some cases, you might want to do that to sacrifice a bit of accuracy for performance. Sometimes it's fine to show all the data. In this case, we're happy to show all of it. So let's just go and save that chart. And we'll make that a little bit bigger. And that can be proudly displayed on our dashboard as well. So let's go back to our deck and let's see what else we've got here. So all those things are useful. Actually, no, before I do that, there's something else I'm going to show. I didn't show you binning and sorting, and that's really cool as well. So let me also show you that as well. So let me create another chart. And this time, I'm going to create a line chart, and we're interested in seeing how our sales are going across time. So every one of these documents relates to a single transaction. So there might be hundreds of transactions a day, hopefully, but we just want to see sort of what's going on month by month. So if I get the sale date of the transactions and I drag it into the category channel, you can see here that it knows that if you want to use dates in the category channel, you want to bin them. That means you want to collect them into a group that represents a period of time. And it's suggested that month might be a good start. So let's go and finish the charts to show the number of sales, and let's put the store location there. So a bit of a crazy graph, but basically we can see here from hundreds of transactions each day, it's just got a single point that represents the sum of all those transactions for that particular month. There's a couple other things I can do. I can switch on periodic. Periodic is great if you want to look at the seasonality of something. So you'll notice that the chart's way less busy because I just have one point for every month of the year. So what that's doing is basically, January means every January. So it's combining January from probably several years into one thing. So it's not showing me the sales from this January, but it means if I want to see, look, how are my sales going up and down over time? That is a really nice way of doing it. I can also choose different periods. So if I just want to see, like, how are my sales tracking year on year? Again, it's a less busy chart, just getting rid of some of that noise, and I can kind of see what the trends might be for those stores a little bit in a bit of a neater way. So this was binning of dates. You can do the exact same thing with numbers as well. So if I drag a number onto category channel, I can go and put that into groups of 10 or 100 or something like that. So let's just go and save this chart. Sales by year. And we'll put that one on a dashboard too. And let's see how much I can do with my trackpad in one finger. Put it over here. See the dashboard layouts kind of snap, so you don't need to spend too much time doing fine-grained pixel pushing, which is usually a good thing, I think. Okay, so now let's go back to what I was saying I was going to do and talk about a document model. So all the things you saw there, you've probably seen somewhat similar things to a greater or lesser degree in other products. What I want to show you now is how Charts really shines when it comes to the MongoDB document model. So I'll show how it understands the different types, how it understands polymorphism, which is a fancy way of saying that different documents can have different fields or different types. Then I'll show you how we can handle nested documents and nested arrays inside those documents and some of the cool things we can do there. So before I get started with this demo, let me actually open another tool, which you're hopefully familiar with, which is MongoDB Compass. So let me show you what these documents look like. So we have a few top-level things: the sale date, the store location, the purchase method that we saw before. The customer is inside a nested document. So you can see here a few fields that are just specifically about the customer. And then we see the items that the customer purchased. And this is an array, so they can purchase any number of items. And to make things even more fun, we have an array inside that array. So every item has got one or more, or probably 0 or more tags. So not that unusual for a MongoDB schema to have this kind of sort of richness in it, but something which would be happen to be modeled with probably at least 2 or 3 tables if you're going to do that inside a relational system, which would obviously impact the way that you do BI on top of it. So let's just look a little bit more carefully about what we can do with charts using those, the notion of the document model. So first, let me explain what's happening here when I choose the data source. So we can see here we have this thing we call the field panel. And it's taken a sample of documents, because remember there is no hard schema in MongoDB, but in practice most documents will probably have similar fields. So we take a sample of a bunch of documents and show what we find. We can see a little icon for every field here that represents the data type. We don't have like every BSON type here. We roll everything down to either a string, a date, or a number. So if you've got a thing like an object ID or some wacky thing, we usually make all those things strings. And all the different numeric types are called numbers. Doesn't change what's in the database, but charts really can treat all those things in the same way. So that's great that we can see these different types and understand what the fields are. But we talked about polymorphism before. So some documents might have fields that other documents don't have. And I happen to know that all of my phone sales, I have this other field called call duration, which doesn't make sense for the others. So rather than have like null values, which you might have done in a relational database, I just don't have those. But I want to graph that. You can see it wasn't in that random sample because it's a minority of documents in my collection actually have that. But all is not lost. If I do a query here and say purchase method is equal to phone, what it's going to do when I apply the filter is it's actually going to resample, and it's only going to resample ones that match that filter. In this case, I've picked up that missing field that wasn't there previously. So what I can do now is do a chart, say let's do store location again because it's our favorite, and then let's go and do the average call duration, and we'll do a mean, and let's also do some sorting from say largest to smallest like that. We can see we do actually have a reasonable variation in the call durations. I was able to pick up that field, which is only in a minority of the documents. Something else we can do, I'll just show you. Remember before I was building multi-series charts by dragging something onto this category series channel. So that's one way of doing it. But if I actually want to compare values from 2 different fields, I can do that a different way. I can drag a second field or even a third or a fourth into the, in this case, the x-axis. So suppose I'm interested in whether there's any correlation between the call duration and the satisfaction. So I can drag the satisfaction in here and again make it mean, which is more sensible and the scales are closer. And now I'm graphing actually 2 quite separate fields, one next to each other. And I can see, in fact, in this case, there doesn't appear to be much of a correlation. But if I didn't have a chart, I wouldn't have known that. So that's pretty nice. So let's, the other thing to mention here, I guess, looking at the document model, so these curly brackets mean this thing is a nested document. So it doesn't really change much about how we build the charts, but I can see that I can collapse these quite nicely. I can also search by a field as well if it was a long document, I could find it that way. So nested individual documents are represented by those curly brackets. So let's save this pretty chart as well. We're building quite a nice dashboard here. I won't bother rearranging that one in front of you. But let's get to the real fun stuff, which is arrays. So let's go back to here. Let's have a look at remember the line items. So in this case, each customer has multiple line items. So let's go and get a stacked bar. And let's go and show, we'll start again with store location, this time in the x-axis, if I can drag properly with this trackpad. And, oops, did the wrong one. So store location, we'll put in the category axis. So remember before we were just dragging this ID and we'll just show the number of purchases in each thing, that's fine. But let's say we want to find out something about the line items. So suppose we want to find out the average number of items that were purchased by customers per store. That sounds really quite complicated, what we're asking it to do. But what we can do here, I can just go and get in the line items, let me just say the name, doesn't really matter what it is, and drag that here. And what Charts is doing is saying, hey, this thing is an array. What do you want to do with this array? You can't plot an array without what we call reducing it. And there's a whole bunch of different things we can do here. So one option is to unwind the array, and I'll show you that later on. That means that every single array member becomes basically its own plottable document. In this case, though, we're just interested in the array length. So, and I want to have the average array length, so I'll do mean. So this is showing for each store what is the average number of items that were purchased. And you can see here there's a slight but not large variation. That's one way of reducing the array. Something else I could do, just say I want to sum the total value of the shopping basket. In this case, let's do the items, and then this time let's just go and choose, we want to sum all the items in each array, and then we want to average across each of the documents. And then let's maybe do a sort by aggregated value so it's easy to see which ones are highest and lowest. So here we've got a whole bunch of numbers, so every document might have like between 1 and 50 items, and we're saying for every document, just sum all those together into the array, and then across each store location, average those things. So it sounds quite complicated, but it's a completely sensible business question to ask, and I did that in about 3 clicks. Doing that kind of thing with a join and relationships in most tools would take a hell of a lot more than 3 clicks to accomplish that. So let's go and do something else interesting then. Let's go back on this axis to just showing the number of sales. It was kind of the first chart we did. And now let's have a look at the this tag. So remember, this is an array of arrays. And this is where we can start having a whole lot of fun. So I drag the tags onto the series channel, and my chart's temporarily disappeared because it's saying, look here, this is an array of arrays. What are you trying to achieve? So you've got to think about it, but basically we want to say, look, first let's say we want to know, we want to see a single item for every tag of every basket from every person. So it sounds complicated, but that's just what unwinding does. So I say, firstly, I want to unwind, so every light item basically becomes its own document. And then I want to unwind the tags as well, so every tag becomes its own document. And this is, again, quite a sensible and beautiful chart. I can see the number of items that were purchased with each tag from each store by doing that double unwind of those particular arrays. But I can do other things. Suppose, for whatever reason, I want to know how many items there were with like 1 tag versus 2 tags versus 3 tags. So in this case, I still want to unwind the items, but for tags, maybe I just want to do the array length. And you see here, it's actually turned on binning, and binning's not very interesting here because the numbers are very small, so I can turn off binning. And here I can see the number of items with 2 tags, 3 tags, and 4 tags. So yeah, really powerful thing I did really quickly. Just one last example with arrays, and one of my favorites is the existence of value. Suppose, let's switch to that one as well. So suppose we're responsible for children's products, and we're interested in how the kids' items are going versus everything else. So I can go and put existence of value kids in that, and did I do that wrong? It's lowercase, is what I did wrong there. And here we can see it's basically showing the number of shopping baskets that included a kids item versus the ones that did not include a kids item across multiple stores. So yeah, like hugely powerful, and it took me about 3 seconds to create that particular chart. And that's just some of the things we can do with arrays. So let's just go and save that one there, put it back to our dashboard. I should give it a title, but it will take more time. And see here we've got a whole range of really interesting charts showing a whole bunch of different things. So let's get back to the slides. So sharing and permissions. So Charts is like a multi-user product, and data is enormously powerful, and sometimes it can be sensitive, and sometimes you want to share it with the world. So we want to make sure you remain in control over who is allowed to do what. So everyone who wants to use Charts has to log in. Anyone can add a data source, and anyone can add a dashboard. But once you add those things, they are yours, you are the owner, and then you can decide who you're going to pull into your inner circle, whether you want to make it shared as either reading or writing, or not at all, with different groups of people. So there's actually 3 different roles that apply to both dashboards and data sources. So anyone can create things, and they become the owner. Then you can assign for a data source, you can have a reader who can just read the data, a manager who can also modify the data source metadata, and then an owner who can change the permissions and also delete the data source. And exactly the same story with dashboards. Anyone can add a dashboard, they'd then become the owner. And then once you're the owner, you can decide that some people can be viewers. They can look but can't touch, basically. The author can modify the dashboard. They can add and remove charts, but they can't delete the dashboard or change permissions. And an owner is all powerful and can do all of those things. We also have really two global roles. You have just a regular user and you have a user admin. So basically a user admin has the power to create and delete and modify user accounts. They don't have any special powers over any dashboards or data sources, so a user admin can't see your private charts, but they are responsible for managing users as well. And then there's just the regular user type. So let me show you quickly what that looks like as well. So remember when I created the data source for that last page, I flipped on this everyone access. So I can bring that up again just by clicking that. So in this case, everyone means all charts users. So I can choose to whether share that with the world or not, or I can choose to add individual people, but in this case, everyone's already a reader. But this dashboard, you can see I've got a little padlock icon, and I can see the same thing if I go into it over here. So that's by default, everything you create is private just to yourself. And while you're working on something, that's probably good, and if it's sensitive, that's probably good as well. But I have the exact same experience here, so I can go and say that, look, I want everyone to be a viewer of this, but maybe this is a little bit more sensitive, so I just want to share it with a couple of people. So I can say that Thomas is allowed to be a viewer, and then Matt is helping me produce the charts. So I want him to make an author, but he can't delete it or change the permissions. And then I apply the changes. So you can see here the icon has changed a little bit to show this is now shared with a group of people. So that's basically how the security model works. It's pretty similar to what you might have seen with Google Docs or something else, but you remain in control. User management is pretty straightforward. Basically, if you're a user admin, you get this extra tab. We don't have any single sign-on now. I know you're all going to ask for it. Basically, for the beta, you have to go and create user accounts directly in Charts, but we will be looking at other options for that. If you're not a user admin, you just don't see that tab, and you just log in and access things on your own. So let's go back to the deck. Okay, so hopefully I've motivated you enough to want to take a look at this. And the great news is that as of basically about 12 o'clock today, this is now available. It is a beta, is the bad news, but the good news is that means it's also free. And we'd love you to try it and really kick the tires with it and try it out. And we think there's things that we haven't done yet, but we think the set of functionality we have there is hopefully still pretty compelling. So go to mongodb.com/charts. Charts is currently effectively an on-prem server product. So you have to install it on a server, could be a virtual machine. It will even run on a laptop. It's not really designed for that. It's a multi-user product. But if you just want to try it out yourself, there's nothing that will prevent you running it even on a laptop. It runs as a Docker container, which is a bit unusual for MongoDB. If you've used Docker before, you'll probably think that's awesome. If you haven't used it, you might be a little bit concerned or scared. Don't be. It actually makes it way easier to install and start and stop than if it wasn't a Docker container. It's got a few moving parts inside, and it's basically just like a little black box you can put on a machine. You don't need to worry about the details. And also it means it runs on any operating system, at least including Linux, macOS, and Windows. Exactly the same container, no different configuration, no different tools. So it's actually a really great way of managing it. Charts also requires a MongoDB instance to run. So if you're interested in Charts, I'm assuming you probably have MongoDB already. But in addition to the databases with the data that you're visualizing, it needs a small database, in fact 3 or so databases that basically just contain the metadata. That's not included with Charts. You have to have one already. It can be an existing one, it can be a new one, it can be on-prem, it can be Atlas, but you have to install that first before you install Charts. So there's some really good documentation explaining this, but just so you know what to expect. So this is how you install it. You go and deploy or identify your MongoDB database for your metadata. Install Docker. The free community edition is all you need, or you can get the enterprise one if you want. Go to the MongoDB download center and say download Charts, and you get like this 1K YAML file that might not feel very impressive, but that basically just tells Docker how to do everything else. So you download that to your server. Create a Docker secret, just one line of command line. That's got the URI of your metadata database. Then run a command called docker stack deploy, which loads up the stack. Your very first charts user you must create with a command line script, so again, one line of code. The reason you need that is otherwise you can't log on. If you want, you can create like 100 users that way, or you can just create one user and then do the rest with the web UI. It's up to you. And then you can access it from any desktop web browser. So I'm almost out of time, but things that we are working on, no promised time frame, but these are all things that we are hoping to get done. So firstly, we are looking at a hosted software as a service version, but the beta is not that model. The beta is something you install yourself. Embedding, a lot of people ask, can I create a chart in Charts, but then embed it in my other app? Today you cannot, but we are going to be working on that, so that will be supported. Big screen support, just automatic refresh, hiding all the Chrome, optimized towards displaying a big dashboard in your common team area or something like that. Tables and numeric visualizations, sometimes it makes more sense to visualize as a table rather than a chart. Interactivity, geospatial, there's a whole lot of things we can do, but please tell us what you need and we'll prioritize those things. So really call to action, please download it. If you've got questions, please come down to the analytics MongoDB booth. I'm there, and also Thomas and Matt from my team are also there, so we'd love to answer your questions. There won't be time in this session for questions, unfortunately. Also, feel free to drop me an email or a tweet if you want. There's also a little button in the corner of every page in the Charts app, and that's like a little chat interface that does not go to a robot. It goes to me and my team. So if you have questions or problems, please do send us a message from inside the app as well. So that's all the time I had today. So really the summary is Charts, brand new product in beta today, fastest way of creating visualizations over your MongoDB data. Please give it a go. Please tell us what you think. And it's been fantastic talking to you all today. Thank you.